Hello and welcome back. We'll start off with stylistic devices now. What you often find is symbolism, so the use of symbols to signify certain ideas or qualities by giving them a certain symbolic meaning that might also be different from their literal sense. So for example, love or a heart has different connotations. Here the skull and bones can stand for death, danger, or someone warning someone. When the author uses specific words that create a visual representation of ideas in our minds, we also call that imagery. Now, there's also the difference between a simile and the metaphor. So a simile is a comparison with words like as or like. They often help to convey meaning more quickly and effectively. So for example, saying that someone's eyes are as blue as the sea conveys a certain idea of that matter. A metaphor takes that even one step further and actually states that one thing is another thing. So as a figure of speech describes an action or object in a way that isn't literally true, but through that comparison explains that idea better. With an allusion to a certain work or idea, or sometimes we also call it reference if it's referencing a certain person or event in history, for example, it's also very easy to quickly create a picture in the mind of the reader. So once I hear 9/11 or anything about the Twin Towers, that directly creates an image in my mind. We have humor, parody, or for example, irony if something is said, but the opposite is actually meant, that can also create a certain effect. There are, of course, more other stylistic devices that you can find. I would suggest that you pay attention to those that were mentioned in class or have a look at the other ones that you can find in your course book. As a tip, I would try to find my own little symbols for these stylistic devices because that can help you to very quickly mark them and annotate the text with that. In the analysis, you could also be asked to have a look at this plot structure, or sometimes it's also called the structural devices. So let's start with the general structure. Is there a certain title or catchy title? Are the paragraphs designed in a certain way? Is there a story line that is represented here that kind of follows through the paragraphs? As we're talking about fictional text, of course, plot or the plot line is important. You've talked about that in class. At some point here, this curve rises, so the tension rises here. The top point is the climax of the story, so there the tension is the highest. Or maybe the excerpt of the text is towards the end, so there's an ending or conclusion that can be seen. That, of course, depends on the kind of text that you have or the kind of excerpt that you have. Also, there is something like maybe a certain symbol or idea that is foreshadowing a certain event, or the other way around, there is possibly a flashback to events that happened before. The last part that we'll talk about here now is the characterization. So what do we get to know about the protagonist or the main character? Is there certain direct information that is being given? So that is the direct characterization of the character, like the age, the looks, appearance, what he likes, does, and so on. A huge part is definitely not directly said, but somewhere between the lines, connected to what the other characters say or the way the main character acts like, that also reveals a lot about the character, his or her character traits. A round character is usually described in a lot of detail, whereas a flat character is not really that interesting and we don't really know that much about him. The relationships between the characters is also important. The development is important in the context of the whole work, but maybe not as important for a little excerpt.